March 12, 1943, the Bismarck Sea, 40 miles northeast of Lae, New Guinea. Through the salt-streaked windows of the destroyer Shikinami's bridge, Lieutenant Commander Yasuo Tanaka watched the approaching aircraft with something approaching amusement. The twin-engine bombers were coming in low, skimming the wave tops in a formation so tight it seemed almost suicidal. "American B-25's," he announced to his bridge crew, unable to suppress a slight smile. "Medium bombers trying to attack a naval convoy. They must be desperate." His executive officer, Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura, nodded in agreement. "Sir, their bombsight requires high-altitude approach. At that altitude, they'll never hit a maneuvering ship. This is madness." The convoy, 8 transports carrying 6,900 troops and supplies to reinforce Lae, escorted by 8 destroyers, maintained its steady course. In the cramped troop compartments below deck, soldiers prepared for landing, unaware that death was approaching at 265 miles per hour, just 50 feet above the Pacific swells. What Tanaka couldn't see from his bridge, what Japanese naval intelligence had failed to comprehend, was that these weren't ordinary B-25 Mitchells. These were modifications that had emerged from the experimental workshops of the 5th Air Force in Australia, transformations conceived by a former airline pilot named Paul Irvin "Pappy" Gunn, who had lost his family to the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. Gunn's modifications were brutal in their simplicity. He had ripped out the bombardier's compartment, the Norden bombsight, the delicate instruments designed for precision bombing from 20,000 feet. In their place, he had installed 8 .50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, all fixed to fire forward, all harmonized to converge at 300 yards. 4 more guns bristled from the side blisters. 12 heavy machine guns total, all pointed in the same direction. The philosophy was revolutionary. Stop trying to drop bombs on ships and start shooting them to pieces at point-blank range. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Major Edward Larner, leading the 90th Bombardment Squadron's attack, had practiced this maneuver exactly twice. The tactic, called skip bombing combined with strafing runs, required flying directly at armed warships at mast height, opening fire at 1,000 yards, and dropping modified bombs with 4-second delay fuses at less than 250 yards before pulling up over the target. Everything about it violated conventional bombing doctrine. Everything about it terrified the crews who had to execute it. In the nose of Larner's B-25, christened Hell's Bell, 8 machine guns were loaded with a mixture of armor-piercing incendiary and tracer rounds. Each gun held 350 rounds in linked belts. The combined rate of fire would put 800 half-inch projectiles per second into whatever the nose pointed at. The weight of fire was equivalent to the broadside of a light cruiser, concentrated into a zone roughly the size of a tennis court. Staff Sergeant William Thompson, manning the right waist gun, had seen the modifications being installed in Port Moresby 2 weeks earlier. He'd asked a mechanic if anyone had tested the airframe's ability to handle the recoil of all 8 guns firing simultaneously. The mechanic had shrugged. "We'll find out tomorrow, I guess." The Japanese had fought American bombers for 16 months and had developed effective countermeasures. High-altitude formations were intercepted by fighters. Medium-altitude attacks faced devastating anti-aircraft fire. Torpedo bombers were slow and vulnerable, but no one in the Imperial Japanese Navy had experienced what was about to happen. A massed gun attack by aircraft carrying more concentrated forward firepower than any fighter in existence. As the B-25's closed to 2,000 yards, the Japanese convoy's anti-aircraft batteries opened up. The sky filled with tracer fire, 25mm shells from the destroyers, 13mm machine gun fire from the transports. Black puffs of exploding shells dotted the air. One B-25 from the second wave took a direct hit and cartwheeled into the sea, creating a white splash that was immediately left behind by the convoy's forward motion. At 1,000 yards, Larner squeezed the trigger. The B-25 shuddered as 8 synchronized machine guns opened fire simultaneously. The sound inside the aircraft was apocalyptic, a continuous thundering roar that made thought impossible.
Spent cartridge casings poured from the ejection chutes, creating a brass rainstorm behind the bomber. The smell of cordite filled the cockpit instantly. On the Shikinami's bridge, Tanaka's world transformed in 3 seconds. The first 50-caliber round struck the destroyer's forward superstructure at 2,900 feet per second. Armor-piercing incendiary bullets punched through steel plating designed to stop shrapnel, detonating inside crew compartments. The bridge window shattered. The forward fire control director exploded in a shower of sparks and shredded metal. 3 officers died instantly, their bodies torn apart by bullets that continued through flesh and bone to destroy the equipment behind them. Tanaka was thrown to the deck by the concussion, his eardrums ruptured by the shrieking sound of metal being shredded. Through the smoke and chaos, he saw one of the B-25's release something, a bomb that seemed to skip across the water like a thrown stone before slamming into Shikinami's hull at the waterline. The bomb, modified with an extended fuse, penetrated the thin hull plating before detonating inside the engineering spaces. The explosion tore a hole 12 feet wide in the destroyer's side. Seawater flooded in at thousands of gallons per second. The ship immediately developed a severe list to port. But the bombs were almost secondary. It was the machine gun fire that was annihilating the convoy. Behind Larner's aircraft, 11 more B-25's opened fire in sequence, each one walking its stream of tracers across a different target. The transport Shikinami, carrying 2,700 troops, took the concentrated fire of 3 bombers simultaneously. Over 2,000 rounds struck the ship in less than 10 seconds. The wooden superstructure disintegrated. Ammunition stored on deck for the landing operation detonated in a series of explosions that tore the ship open. Soldiers trapped below deck had no chance as the vessel broke in half and sank in less than 4 minutes. Captain James Downs, flying the B-25 Desert Rat in the second wave, later described the scene in his combat report. "We came in at 50 feet. The entire convoy was burning. Ships were already sinking. The destroyers were trying to maneuver, but they couldn't bring their main guns to bear. We were too low and too close. Their anti-aircraft fire was intense but poorly aimed. They weren't trained to engage targets at mast height. When we opened fire, I saw the bow of my target literally torn apart, metal peeling away like paper. Then the bomb hit and the entire forward section disappeared in an orange fireball." The Battle of the Bismarck Sea would last 3 days, but the outcome was decided in the first 15 minutes of March 3, 1943. 8 transports sunk. 4 destroyers sunk. 4 more destroyers damaged. Approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers drowned. Dozens of aircraft shot down. The American losses: 5 aircraft, 13 crew members. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Each B-25 could deliver 4,200 rounds of 50-caliber ammunition plus up to 6 500-pound bombs in a single pass. The concentrated fire could disable or sink a transport in one attack run. No ship in the convoy could maneuver quickly enough to evade an aircraft traveling at 265 miles per hour at wave-top height. But more significantly, the attack demonstrated something Japanese naval planners had never considered: that a medium bomber could be transformed into a ship-killing weapon more effective than torpedo bombers, dive bombers, or high-altitude precision attacks. The B-25, designed for strategic bombing missions against land targets, had become a maritime weapon of unprecedented lethality. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka survived the sinking of Shikinami, pulled from the water by a submarine 3 days later. His interrogation report, captured when the submarine was sunk in 1944, revealed the psychological impact of the attack. "The American bombers came at us like fighters, but with the firepower of battleships. Our anti-aircraft training assumed aircraft would attack from altitude or with torpedoes at longer range. We had no defense against this tactic. The sound of those guns, continuous, like tearing fabric but magnified 1,000 times, was followed immediately by the destruction of everything the bullets touched: officers, equipment, gun crews, all destroyed in seconds. Then the bombs. We never had time to understand what was happening before our ship was dying."
Paul Irvin Gunn had never intended to revolutionize naval warfare. He had simply wanted to kill Japanese. Before the war, Gunn had been a civilian pilot for Philippine Airlines, living in Manila with his wife Polly and their 4 children. When the Japanese invaded in December 1941, Gunn was in Australia. His family was trapped. Despite desperate attempts to arrange evacuation, they were captured and interned at Santo Tomas prison camp. Commissioned as a captain in the Army Air Forces, Gunn threw himself into the war with single-minded fury. He became known throughout the 5th Air Force as the man who could fix anything, modify anything, improve anything. But his modifications weren't academic exercises. They were expressions of rage translated into engineering. The standard B-25's Mitchell that arrived in the Southwest Pacific in early 1942 was a capable medium bomber. 4.50 caliber defensive guns, 3,000-pound bomb load, 1,500-mile range. But in the maritime environment of the Pacific, where targets were ships rather than factories, the conventional bombing approach was proving ineffective. General George Kenney, commanding the 5th Air Force, had watched his B-17s and B-24s waste thousands of bombs trying to hit maneuvering ships from high altitude. The Norden bombsight, so effective against stationary land targets, was nearly useless against ships that could turn and accelerate. Torpedo attacks, while potentially effective, required slow, low-altitude approaches that made bombers easy targets for fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Gunn proposed something different, turned the bomber into a gunship. The first experimental conversion was completed in September 1942 at Eagle Farm Airfield near Brisbane. Gunn's team removed the bombardier's compartment and plexiglass nose, replacing them with a solid metal nose containing 4 .50 caliber machine guns. 2 more guns were added in blisters on each side of the forward fuselage. The bomb bay was modified to carry smaller bombs with extended delay fuses designed to skip across the water before detonating against or inside a ship's hull. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Major William Benn, operations officer of the 3rd Bomb Group, flew the first combat test mission on December 19, 1942, attacking a Japanese convoy near Cape Gloucester. His after-action report was ecstatic. The forward firepower is devastating. Strafing runs silenced anti-aircraft positions before we reached bomb release point. The concentrated fire destroyed the bridge structure of one transport, killed visible deck crews, and caused panic among those who survived. Our bombs hit and penetrated the hull. The ship was sinking when we departed the area. By January 1943, Gunn's team was modifying entire squadrons. The evolution continued. 6 nose guns became 8. Ammunition capacity increased. Gun harmonization was refined to create a cone of destruction at optimal range. Pilots developed the skip bombing technique through practice runs on wrecked ships in Australian harbors. But the modifications came with challenges that killed crews learning the new tactics. The concentrated forward firepower created tremendous recoil that could affect the aircraft's stability. Pilots had to learn to compensate, applying subtle back pressure on the controls while firing to prevent the nose from dropping. The low-altitude approach required split-second timing. Too early and the bombs would skip over the target. Too late and the bomber would be too close to avoid the explosion. Lieutenant Raymond Wilkins crashed into the sea during a training run on February 2, 1943, apparently unable to pull up in time after his bomb release. His B-25 cartwheeled across the water and sunk immediately, taking all 6 crew members with it. The accident report noted, "Pilot may have been fixated on target and failed to initiate recovery. Low-altitude attack profile leaves no margin for error or hesitation." Despite the risks, word of the modified B-25's effectiveness spread throughout the Pacific. Fighter pilots, traditionally dismissive of bomber trash, began treating the gunship crews with new respect. Japanese radio intercepts showed increasing concern about low-flying twin-engine fighters with enormous firepower. The Imperial Japanese Navy attempted to develop countermeasures. Destroyers increased their light anti-aircraft armament, adding more 25mm guns. Ships began sailing with gun crews at constant readiness when within range of Allied airfields. Tactical manuals emphasized early detection and engagement of low-flying aircraft. None of it mattered. The physics were unforgiving. A ship, even a destroyer capable of 30 knots, required hundreds of yards to turn. A B-25 approaching at 265 miles per hour covered that distance in seconds. Once the bombers began their attack runs, evasion was impossible. Colonel Marion Cooper, who would later produce King Kong, flew as an observer on a March 1st mission and reported to General MacArthur. The modified B-25 has transformed our maritime attack capability. Where we previously needed dozens of aircraft to suppress a convoy, we can now achieve decisive results with a single squadron. The psychological effect on Japanese crews is profound. They cannot defend against this tactic with current shipboard weapons. The success of the Bismarck Sea attack validated everything Gunn had conceived. Within weeks, modification kits were being shipped to every B-25 unit in the Pacific. The Army Air Force's Modification Center in Townsville, Australia, could now convert a standard B-25 to gunship configuration in less than a week. But the true evolution of the weapon was happening in the tactical realm. Pilots were discovering that the 8-gun nose could be used for more than ship attacks. Airfields could be strafed with devastating effect. Japanese fighters attempting to intercept at low altitude found themselves outgunned. Ground installations, previously requiring multiple bombing runs, could be neutralized in a single pass.
By June 1943, Japanese shipping in the Southwest Pacific was operating under conditions approaching paralysis. Convoys that had previously sailed during daylight now moved only at night. Ships that had hugged the coastlines now ventured further offshore, accepting the risk of submarine attack to avoid the B-25 hunting packs that prowled coastal waters. Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka, commanding the Southeast Area Fleet from Rebel, received daily reports that read like casualty lists from a losing campaign. His operations log for the week of June 14 to 21 recorded: 7 transports sunk, 3 destroyers sunk, 2 cruisers damaged, 12 barges destroyed, 4 aircraft destroyed on the ground at Leh Airfield. American losses: 3 aircraft, 18 crew members. The mathematics of attrition were destroying Japan's ability to reinforce and supply its garrisons, but the numbers didn't convey the human horror of these attacks. Seaman First Class Kenji Yamamoto survived the sinking of the transport Ikoku Maru on June 16th. His account, recorded by American intelligence after his capture 3 months later, provided chilling details. The alarm sounded at dawn, aircraft approaching low. We ran to our anti-aircraft positions. I could see them coming across the water, maybe 20 meters above the waves. Twin engines, coming directly at us. Our guns opened fire, but they didn't turn away. Then they began shooting. I had never heard anything like it. Not the sharp crack of rifles or the thud of artillery. This was a continuous roar, like a giant shredding metal with enormous claws. I saw the forward gun position simply disappear. The gun, the crew, the mount, all torn apart in an instant. Bullets were hitting everywhere. They punched through steel. They ricocheted off everything. The sound of impacts was like rain on a tin roof, but each raindrop was death. Then I saw a bomb skip past the ship. I thought we had been lucky. 3 seconds later, it exploded against the hull below the waterline. The deck jumped under my feet. Water began flooding in. The ship was already listing when the second bomber attacked. More of that terrible gunfire. The bridge was shot to pieces. The captain died there, I think. Everyone on the bridge died. We abandoned ship. In the water, I watched 4 more bombers attack the convoy. Every ship was hit. Some were already sinking. The destroyers were shooting back, but they couldn't hit the bombers. They were too fast, too low. One destroyer tried to ram a bomber that flew directly over it. Insane. The bomber just pulled up and shot the destroyer's bridge to scrap as it climbed away. I was in the water for 2 days.
Sharks took many men. The Americans didn't rescue us. They were too far away when the battle ended. A submarine found me. They said I was lucky. 47 survivors from a ship carrying 2,200 troops. The mathematics of attrition were destroying Japan's ability to reinforce and supply its garrisons. The tactical situation had become impossible for the Japanese. Traditional convoy defense required air cover, but Japanese fighters based in New Guinea were being systematically destroyed on the ground by, ironically, the same B-25's that were killing ships at sea. The gunships would arrive at dawn, strafe the airfields for 5 minutes with their concentrated forward firepower, and be gone before effective response could be organized. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace pilot, encountered B-25 gunships while flying a Zero from Rabaul. His post-war memoir described the engagement with unusual candor. We intercepted a formation of 4 American twin-engine bombers at low altitude. They were returning from attacking our shipping. We attacked from astern, the standard approach against bombers. Their tailgunners opened fire, accurate, disciplined. We pressed the attack anyway. Then the bombers did something unexpected. They turned toward us. Toward us. This violated every principle of bomber defense. But when they turned, I understood why. Each aircraft had more forward-facing guns than I had ever seen. They opened fire at 500 meters. The volume of fire was unbelievable. Tracer rounds filled the air between us. Nakamura, flying on my wing, took hits immediately. I saw pieces of his Zero torn away. He rolled inverted and crashed into the sea. I broke off the attack immediately. Any fighter pilot who didn't was committing suicide. These were not bombers in the traditional sense. They were flying fortresses designed to kill ships and aircraft with equal efficiency. We reported this to command. They didn't believe us. Bombers don't fight back aggressively, we were told. You must have encountered fighters. But we knew what we had seen. The Americans had created something new, and we had no counter for it. By August 1943, the 5th Air Force's B-25 units were operating with near impunity. Entire squadrons would sweep up the coast of New Guinea, attacking any Japanese vessel foolish enough to move during daylight. The sight of low-flying Mitchells became synonymous with certain death for Japanese sailors. The crew of Captain Harold Thomas's B-25 Betty's Dream exemplified the evolution of these airmen into specialist maritime hunters. Thomas had flown 37 ship attack missions by September 1943, sinking or damaging 19 vessels. His navigator, Lieutenant George Patterson, maintained a detailed log of their attacks that read like a professional hunter's diary. Mission 23, July 12. 3 transports and 1 destroyer northeast of Finschhafen. Attacked lead transport from 200 feet. 8-gun nose burst lasted 3 seconds. Observed complete destruction of bridge structure, forward gun positions, and deck cargo. Skip bomb hit waterline. Ship sinking when we departed. Time over target, 47 seconds. Mission 27, July 29. 2 destroyers escorting a damaged cruiser. Attacked southern destroyer from 150 feet. Initial burst killed visible deck crews and destroyed forward superstructure. Skip bomb penetrated hull aft of midships. Ship developed severe list immediately. Second pass at 100 feet. All forward guns, no bomb. Destroyer's stern rose vertically and sank in less than 2 minutes. Crew in the water. Did not strafe survivors per standing orders. Mission 34, August 19. Large transport, approximately 6,000 tons, hugging coast near Wewak. Ship attempted evasive maneuvers, futile at our approach speed. Forward guns fired for 4 seconds from 300 yards. Ammunition storage on deck detonated. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship. No bomb required. Ship broke in half. Both sections sank within 5 minutes. No survivors observed. The clinical tone of Patterson's log entries couldn't mask the brutal effectiveness of their missions. Each entry represented hundreds of Japanese sailors killed, thousands of tons of supplies sent to the bottom, strategic objectives abandoned for lack of reinforcement. What terrified the Japanese high command more than the tactical effectiveness of individual attacks was the industrial capacity behind them. Every sunken B-25 was replaced within days. Every lost pilot was replaced by one equally well-trained. The Americans weren't just winning battles,
They were winning through overwhelming material superiority that Japan could never match. North American Aviation's Inglewood, California, and Kansas City, Kansas facilities were producing B-25's faster than the Japanese could destroy them. At peak production in 1944, one complete bomber rolled off the Kansas City assembly line every 60 minutes, 24 hours per day. Each aircraft represented 165,000 individual parts, 400 gallons of paint, 20,000 rivets, and 1,200 man-hours of skilled labor. The contrast with Japanese production was stark and ultimately decisive. Japan's aircraft industry, never highly industrialized, was struggling to produce 1,500 aircraft per month of all types by mid-1943. America was producing 7,000 aircraft monthly, and that was just the Army Air Forces. Naval aviation production was separate and equally massive. But production numbers alone didn't capture the full picture. American aircrew training produced 30,000 new pilots annually by 1944. Each B-25 pilot received a minimum of 400 flight hours before entering combat, including 100 hours in the B-25 itself. They practiced skip bombing against target barges, air-to-air gunnery against towed targets, formation flying, navigation, and emergency procedures. Japanese pilots, by contrast, were entering combat in 1943 with less than 100 total flight hours. Advanced training, the kind that taught subtle skills like deflection shooting, formation leadership, and tactical flexibility, was being sacrificed to rush pilots to combat units. The result was predictable. American pilots arrived in theater better prepared than Japanese instructors. First Lieutenant Robert Greene, arriving at Port Moresby in October 1943 to join the 38th Bomb Group, exemplified this training advantage. His logbook showed 487 flight hours, including 143 hours in the B-25. He had practiced skip bombing against moored hulks in Tampa Bay for 32 missions. He had fired 12,000 rounds at towed targets, achieving an average accuracy rate of 23%. Mediocre by peacetime standards, but delivered by 8 synchronized guns simultaneously, that accuracy was devastating. Greene's first combat mission was flown as co-pilot with Captain Donald Riggs, a veteran of 17 ship attack missions. The target was a small convoy northeast of Wewak, 2 transports and 1 destroyer. Greene's personal account, written years later, captured the reality of these attacks. Captain Riggs let me fly the attack run. We approached at 50 feet, engines at maximum continuous power, 265 indicated airspeed. The destroyer saw us at about 2 miles and opened fire. Red tracer rounds floated toward us. They looked slow until you realized they were coming at 2,500 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, Riggs said, "Fire." I pressed the triggers. The aircraft shuddered violently. The noise was incredible even through the headset. I could see the tracers converging on the destroyer's bow. Metal was tearing away. Men were falling. A gun position exploded. At 250 yards, Riggs said, "Bomb away." I hit the release. The aircraft jumped slightly as 1,000 pounds left the bomb bay. The bomb skipped once, twice, then disappeared against the destroyer's hull. We pulled up over the ship, so close I could see faces looking up at us. Then the bomb detonated. The destroyer's bow section lifted out of the water, bent upward at an impossible angle. Steam and smoke exploded from the wound. The entire attack, from opening fire to clearing the target, took 11 seconds. 11 seconds to cripple or kill a warship. That's when I understood what we were doing here. This wasn't warfare as it had been practiced for centuries. This was industrial slaughter. The Japanese attempted to adapt. Naval engineers designed reinforced bulkheads and improved damage control systems. Convoy tactics emphasized dispersal and continuous maneuvering. Fighter coverage was increased when possible. Nothing worked. The fundamental problem was mathematical. A ship, no matter how well designed or commanded, could not dodge an aircraft closing at 4 miles per minute while simultaneously firing concentrated weapons.
The time from visual acquisition to attack completion was less than 30 seconds. Not enough time to turn, accelerate, or coordinate defensive fire effectively. Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, understood the implications. In a private letter to a colleague in June 1943, shortly before his death, he wrote, "The Americans have achieved something we never anticipated. They have transformed medium bombers into ship killers more effective than specialized torpedo aircraft. Their industrial capacity allows them to produce these weapons in quantities we cannot match. Our losses at sea are becoming unsustainable. I fear we are being methodically bled to death." By December 1943, Japanese shipping losses in the Southwest Pacific exceeded the Empire's ability to construct replacements. Merchant ship production averaged 200,000 tons monthly. Losses exceeded 300,000 tons. The mathematics of defeat were inexorable. The psychological impact on Japanese sailors was catastrophic. Survivors of B-25 attacks described a terror unlike anything they had experienced. The distinctive engine sound of approaching Mitchells caused panic. Sailors who had faced American submarines, carrier aircraft, and battleship bombardment without flinching spoke of B-25's in hushed, fearful tones. A captured diary, found on Saipan in 1944, contained this entry from a sailor named Takeshi Hiro. July 3, 1943. The American twin-engine bombers attacked our convoy today. I have faced death many times, but nothing compares to this. The sound of their guns is like the world ending. They come so fast, so low, you see them and then they are upon you and everything is tearing apart. Tanaka is dead. Yoshida is dead. Half my division is dead. The ship is sinking. We are ordered to another convoy tomorrow. I do not think I will survive this war.
March 1945. The same waters where Lieutenant Commander Tanaka had watched the first B-25 attacks with amusement 2 years earlier. Captain Harold Thomas was flying his 63rd and final mission before rotating home. His target? A lone Japanese destroyer attempting to evacuate troops from Wewak. The war had changed dramatically since 1943. American forces controlled most of New Guinea. The Philippines had been recaptured. Japan's maritime lifelines were severed. But B-25 gunships continued hunting the dwindling number of ships still attempting to supply isolated garrisons. Thomas approached the destroyer from the northwest, sun at his back, at 100 feet above calm water. His crew had flown so many of these missions that communication was unnecessary. Everyone knew their role. The nose guns were loaded, harmonized, and ready. The modified 1,000-pound bomb hung in the bay, 4-second delay fuse set. At 800 yards, the destroyer opened fire. Thomas didn't even flinch. The anti-aircraft fire was lighter than 2 years ago. Ammunition shortages, crew exhaustion, or simply resignation to inevitable defeat. At 400 yards, Thomas opened fire. The 8 nose guns roared. Tracer rounds converged on the destroyer's bridge. In the 3 seconds Thomas held the triggers down, 600 rounds struck the ship. The bridge disintegrated. The forward gun mount was torn from its mount. Secondary explosions rippled along the deck as ammunition cooked off. At 200 yards, Thomas released his bomb. It skipped twice and struck the destroyer just forward of the engineering spaces. The delay fuse worked perfectly. The bomb penetrated the hull before detonating internally. The explosion broke the destroyer's keel. The ship folded in the middle like a broken toy. Thomas pulled up and banked left, climbing to 500 feet to observe the damage. The destroyer was already sinking, bow and stern rising as the middle section disappeared beneath the waves. Small figures jumped from the deck into the water. In less than 90 seconds, the ship was gone. Only floating debris and men struggling in the water marked where a warship had existed. Thomas's radio crackled. "Nice shooting, Skipper. That's number 22." 22 ships sunk or damaged in 63 missions. Thomas's record was good, but not exceptional. Several pilots had exceeded 30 ship kills. The B-25 gunship units had collectively sunk or damaged over 250 Japanese vessels in 2 years of operations. The larger strategic picture was even more devastating. By March 1945, Japan's merchant marine had been reduced to less than 2.5 million tons from a 1941 peak of 6 million tons. The war was being won not through dramatic fleet actions or carrier duels, but through the systematic annihilation of Japan's logistics, and the B-25 gunship had played a crucial role in that strangulation. But victory's mathematics concealed its human cost. Thomas's crew had watched hundreds of men die in these attacks. They had seen ships torn apart, sailors consumed by fire, survivors struggling in shark-infested waters. The clinical efficiency of their missions couldn't erase the reality that each attack meant hundreds of deaths. Staff Sergeant William Chen, Thomas's top turret gunner since 1943, later reflected on this in an interview conducted in 1987. People ask if I felt anything shooting at ships. The truth is complicated. We were killing men. I understood that. I saw them on the decks, saw them fall when our guns hit them. But they were also the enemy, and they would have killed us without hesitation. What stayed with me wasn't the attacks themselves. Those happened so fast there was no time for emotion. It was the aftermath. Circling the wreckage, seeing men in the water, knowing many wouldn't survive. We couldn't rescue them. We could barely confirm they were even there before we had to return to base for fuel. I remember one mission clearly. July 1944, attacking a small transport. We hit it perfectly. Guns tore up the superstructure, bomb penetrated the hull. The ship was sinking fast. As we circled, I saw maybe 200 men abandon ship. The water was full of sharks. We could see the fins circling. There was nothing we could do. We flew home while those men drowned or were taken by sharks. Did it bother me? Yes. Does it still bother me? Yes. Would I have done anything differently? No. That's the war we fought. Clean from altitude, ugly up close, necessary regardless. By April 1945, Japanese shipping in the Southwest Pacific had effectively ceased. The few remaining vessels moved only at night in small groups, hugging coastlines, praying to avoid the B-25 hunting packs that prowled during daylight. Most garrisons were now completely isolated, dependent on submarine supply runs or native barges for survival. Admiral Tomoshige Samejima, commanding what remained of the 8th Fleet, surrendered in Rebelle in September 1945 with his forces still intact but completely cut off. His post-surrender interview revealed the extent to which the B-25 attacks had affected Japanese naval operations. The American gunship bombers made daylight convoy operations suicidal by mid-1944. We lost the ability to reinforce or supply our positions. Troops starved, equipment deteriorated, morale collapsed, all because we could not safely move ships in daylight. The Americans called them B-25's. We called them Umi no Akua, demons of the sea. The psychological effect on our sailors was profound. Men who had survived battleship engagements and carrier strikes would refuse to board transports bound for New Guinea. They knew the American gunships were waiting. I lost more ships to those bombers than to submarines, surface action, and mines combined. Each attack was quick, brutal, and almost impossible to defend against. Our anti-aircraft guns couldn't track targets at that altitude and speed. Our fighters couldn't reach their bases. Our ships couldn't outmaneuver them. If I were to identify the single weapon that most damaged our ability to wage war in the Southwest Pacific, it would be that modified bomber with 8 machine guns in the nose. The post-war analysis confirmed Samejima's assessment. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, examining Japanese logistics in the Pacific, determined that modified B-25 gunships had accounted for approximately 40% of all Japanese shipping losses in the Southwest Pacific theater between March 1943 and August 1945. The economic value of these losses exceeded $2 billion in 1945 dollars, roughly $30 billion in modern currency. But perhaps the most significant impact was tactical and psychological.
The B-25 gunship had forced the Japanese Navy to abandon daylight operations entirely in contested waters, effectively ceding control of the sea to the Allies. This meant troops couldn't be reinforced, supplies couldn't be delivered, and wounded couldn't be evacuated except under cover of darkness, and even then, under constant threat. Paul "Pappy" Gunn, the civilian engineer whose rage of losing his family had sparked the gunship modification program, survived the war. His wife and children were liberated from Santo Tomas prison camp in February 1945, severely malnourished but alive. Gunn was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his contributions to the war effort, though he never spoke publicly about his role in developing the weapon that had killed thousands of Japanese sailors. In a private letter to a friend in 1946, Gunn wrote, "They tell me my modifications changed the war. Maybe they did. I just wanted to hit back at the people who took my family. I wanted to hurt them the way they hurt me. I succeeded. But success in war looks different in peacetime. I see the faces sometimes, the men on those ships. They had families too. Their crime was serving their country, just like our boys served ours. I don't regret what I did. The war demanded it, but I don't celebrate it either."
The final B-25 gunship mission of World War II was flown on August 13, 1945, 2 days before Japan's surrender. A lone Japanese submarine surfaced in Subic Bay, attempting to evacuate personnel from Luzon. Lieutenant James Rivera's B-25 Pacific Fury attacked at dawn, 8 nose guns firing for 4 seconds before the submarine crash-dived. The submarine survived, possibly the last Japanese vessel to endure a B-25 attack and live. Rivera's combat report, the last filed by a B-25 gunship crew in combat, was characteristically clinical. Target: submarine, surfaced, approximately 2,000 tons. Range: 600 yards. Gun run duration: 4 seconds. Estimated 700 rounds fired. Observed strikes on conning tower and forward deck. Target submerged before bomb release. Bomb dropped on estimated position, no observed effect. Submarine presumed damaged but mobile. Time over target, 38 seconds. 38 seconds. In those brief moments, a weapon born of desperation, engineered from rage, and perfected through brutal practice, had one final encounter with its prey. Then, silence. The B-25 gunship variants were rapidly decommissioned after 1945. The tactical innovation that had terrorized Japanese shipping for 2 years was no longer needed in a world without war. The aircraft were stripped of their gun modifications and sold as surplus or scrapped for aluminum. Within 5 years, most had been cut apart or melted down. A handful survived. The National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, displays a fully restored B-25J configured with the 8-gun nose. Visitors can see the tightly packed machine guns, the ammunition feed systems, the reinforced mounting structures. But they cannot hear the sound those guns made, cannot feel the shudder of the airframe under sustained fire, cannot experience the terror of being on the receiving end. Veterans of those missions now in their 90s or passed into history rarely discussed their experiences publicly. When they did, their descriptions shared common elements: the speed of the attacks, the devastating effect of concentrated firepower, the horror and necessity intertwined. In 2003, at a reunion of the 90th Bombardment Squadron in San Antonio, Texas, the few surviving crew members gathered to remember their war. Captain Edward Larner, who had led the first gunship attack in the Bismarck Sea 60 years earlier, was asked what he remembered most clearly. His answer, recorded on video, captured the complexity of their experience. The sound. That's what I remember. 8 50s firing together made a sound like nothing else. Continuous, mechanical, overwhelming. It was the sound of American industrial power focused into 11 seconds of violence. It was the sound of young men dying on ships that couldn't escape and couldn't fight back effectively. It was the sound of war reduced to mathematics and machinery. We did terrible things from those cockpits. Necessary things. Things that had to be done to end a terrible war, but terrible nonetheless. I don't apologize for it. Those Japanese ships were carrying troops and supplies to kill Allied soldiers, but I don't celebrate it either. Mostly, I remember the silence after each mission, flying home, engines throttled back, everyone alone with their thoughts. We'd just killed hundreds of men in less than a minute. We'd done it efficiently, effectively, professionally. And tomorrow, we'd do it again. That's what war demanded. That's what we delivered. The B-25 gunship wasn't the biggest weapon of the war or the most famous, but pound for pound, mission for mission, it might have been the most effective anti-shipping weapon ever created. It certainly scared the hell out of the Japanese, and it helped win the war. That's all I can say. The statistics tell part of the story. Over 300 Japanese ships sunk or damaged, thousands of enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground, tens of thousands of casualties inflicted, strategic victory achieved in the Southwest Pacific. But numbers cannot capture the experience of combat, the fear, the adrenaline, the split-second decisions, the haunting aftermath. Lieutenant Commander Yasuo Tanaka, who had watched the first B-25 attacks with amusement in March 1943, survived the war. He was rescued from the water after Shikinami sank, spent the remainder of the conflict in shore assignments, and returned to Japan in 1946. In his memoirs, published in Japanese in 1968, he reflected on that first encounter. "We laughed at them. The Americans had sent us ungainly bombers trying to attack ships at wave-top height. It seemed amateurish, desperate, foolish. We stopped laughing when the guns opened fire. I had never imagined such concentrated firepower from an aircraft. The sound alone was terrifying, mechanical, relentless, the sound of a machine designed only to destroy. In 3 seconds, my ship was crippled. In 30 seconds, it was sinking. In 3 minutes, I was in the water watching my home for 3 years disappear beneath the waves. That was my introduction to American industrial warfare. The lesson was clear. They didn't need to be elegant or sophisticated. They just needed to be overwhelmingly effective. I never laughed at American weapons again, and I never forgot the sound of those 8 machine guns firing in unison. It was the sound of our defeat, though we didn't know it yet. It was the sound of a nation that could turn medium bombers into ship killers through raw engineering and firepower. It was the sound of the future, and the future belonged to America. The B-25 gunship's reign as Japan's maritime nightmare lasted just 29 months, from March 1943 to August 1945. But in that brief span, it fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Southwest Pacific. It severed Japanese supply lines, isolated garrisons, and proved that innovation combined with industrial capacity could overcome tactical and experiential disadvantages. More than that, it demonstrated the American approach to warfare: pragmatic, industrial, overwhelming. When conventional tactics failed, America innovated. When innovation required resources, America provided them. When the new weapons needed skilled operators, America trained them. The result was a systematic, almost mechanical prosecution of the war that left no room for enemy adaptation. The Japanese had laughed at the ungainly bombers skimming the waves in March 1943. By September 1945, their merchant marine was destroyed, their garrisons were isolated, and their ability to wage war had been strangled by air power, focused not on dramatic city bombing, but on the unglamorous work of killing ships. The thunder of those 8 synchronized Browning machine guns had spoken, and the sea belonged to America.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.